Good afternoon. Today is the 27th of February 2025. I want to do this brief video because of information that's been released by MBIE today around the self-contained motor vehicle legislation, and specifically around the fact that porta potties are not compliant with the regulations. We first exposed this issue around porta potties some 6 months ago. We, unlike many issuing authorities and certifiers, have the capability of actually interpreting legislation and considered regulations correctly. It was very obvious to us right from day one that Section 17 of the plumbers and gas fitters legislation, which dealt with self-contained motor vehicles, was specifically written in order to prohibit the use of porta potties while freedom camping in an RV. In fact, if you go one step further back in history, the whole self-contained motor vehicle bill, which was introduced by Minister Stuart Nash, was done for the sole purpose of prohibiting the use of porta potties. And that was based on the assumption that the non-use of porta potties meant that people were using roadsides and buses as opposed to using public toilets, etc. So that's where we started from. With today's clarification that porta potties are not compliant with the regulations, we've ended up with something of a dilemma, because for over 6 months now, people have been convinced and sold on the idea that fitting an aftermarket bracket to a porta potty would make it compliant with the regulations, except it didn't. The aftermarket bracket was, to start with, an unlawful modification to a toilet. It's still required, in the case of a porta potty, for the base of the toilet to be removed in order to empty human waste, which is not permitted under the regulations. The base of the toilet must be secured to the vehicle, which of course in the case of a porta potty you can't do because the base has to be removed to empty the human waste. Many certifying or issuing authorities actually claim that these brackets were compliant. We said they weren't, and we did so not as to be nasty or underhanded, but because we actually understood the regulations. Myself, personally, I've been a consumer advocate for over 35 years. I could not stand back and watch people being misled that porta potties could comply with the regulations when they very clearly could not. It matters not what you did to a porta potty. It would never comply with the legislation. Meantime, there's potentially thousands of porta potties out there that have been fitted with another aftermarket bracket amongst claims that those brackets make them compliant. They don't. Additionally, we've seen many examples of porta potties in RVs compliant with a green certificate. Many, they haven't even had an attempt to fix the porta potty to the vehicle. One issuing authority in particular stands out as the main offender in improperly certifying vehicles with porta potties. And that certifying agency authority is called New Zealand Lifestyle Camping Limited. They have agents and testing agents all around the country. They are rated, and MBIE even states this in their information bundle released today. They are one of two of the biggest certifying agencies in New Zealand. The other being the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association, who are largely responsible for the self-contained motor vehicle legislation and the bill as introduced by Stuart Nash, because it is their assumptions and their hearsay which has led to this whole thing around porta potties. And most of that's been complied has been because they've got a hatred of slider vans and international tourists. And even recently in a recent video, which can be found online, the absolutely vile attacks on international tourists, which actually have no supporting evidence whatsoever, at least not as a specific group who is more to blame than anybody else. We're not saying it doesn't happen. We just say it doesn't happen at the degree that NZMCA would have people believe. But moving on, people have got all these brackets, they've got porta potties, and they're now wondering, what is their legal comeback against people who have issued green certificates, people who have sold them brackets claiming that they are able to make a porta potty compliant, etc. I'll try not to get too far into it. Your first case of contact, if you are affected by this decision, is the person you have a contract with. If you have bought a vehicle that has got a green certificate and a porta potty, your first line of defence is the person you bought that vehicle off. You would have more luck, of course, from a dealer than what you would have from a private individual. But your contract is with the person you bought the vehicle from. If you have bought a bracket based on the statements that would make your porta potty compliant, then you are actually have a case against the supplier of that bracket. Whether that supplier be a retailer or the manufacturer of the bracket or a wholesaler of the bracket, your first point, your contract is with the supplier of the bracket. Now, I will one word, we're all in here. Burnsco Marine sold these brackets. Burnsco Marine were very, very careful about how they promoted them. Burnsco said that these are the links, and they supplied the links on their website to the self-contained motor vehicle requirements. They also suggested that people talk to their certifiers before purchasing a bracket to ensure that they understood whether or not the certifier would in fact certify the bracket as being compliant. Burnsco have done everything possible to protect themselves from a legal comeback. Others have not. In fact, to the contrary, many have actually said, these brackets make your porta potty compliant, and that's the end of story. So if you've bought a bracket expecting it on the understanding that it will make your porta potty compliant, then you're the supplier of that bracket. If, on the other hand, you have fitted a bracket based on advice from a certifier that the bracket is compliant or would make a porta potty compliant, your comeback is against the certifier and the issuing authority. So if you went to, say, a certifier called John Smith, who worked under the banner of New Zealand Lifestyle Camping Limited, you would have a case against not only John Smith as having approved it at the first level, but also against New Zealand Lifestyle Camping, who also issued the final certification. I think, generally speaking, that covers most of the issues that you'll come across. If there are issues around you can actually end up in a situation where you have more than one person who is actually held liable for your costs. The costs are not limited to the refunding of the price of the bracket or the return of the bracket. It goes way, way, way beyond that. And we actually warned these people 6 months ago about their legal liabilities. They are liable not only for refunding the price of a bracket or refunding certification, they actually have to put the things right. is to put in right the accounts to state, to quote Alan Martin, if you have bought a bracket, you've had it shipped to you, you've had it fitted, you've paid someone to fit it, you have got a certification which is now non-compliant, you're actually able to claim all those things back from whoever is determined to be liable. That's the certifier or the issuing agency or the supplier of the bracket. It is called Consumer Guarantees Law Act. It covers you for any costs that you incur due to misrepresentations by people selling or supplying products and services. Everybody, there is no out. You cannot contract out of consumer guarantees legislation. If anyone has more questions about this, on Responsible Campers Association's Facebook groups, we are aiming to having a Q&A, if you like. Ask questions under this video. The link to this video will be posted up there, and we will answer what we can. Alternatively, you can also ask questions in the comment section of this video. We are actually disgusted that we weren't listened to 6 months ago, because literally we are aware there's thousands of brackets that have been sold that are non-compliant, and there's also thousands of certifications being issued that are also non-compliant. You have come back, and we suggest that people do that. If you want independent advice, we do suggest that you take information. You can go and visit either your local Citizens Advice Bureau. You won't find me there. I've actually retired from the Bureau some years ago, but still do advocacy work, or even go to Community Law Centre and talk to them. But your comeback's against the person you have the contract to. So either the person you bought your van from, the person you bought the bracket from, if you fitted it, the certifier or the issuing authority if you bought a bracket on their advice. So yeah, that's it. Goodbye. I think Responsible Campers Association has again set the lead on being the head advocate for all freedom campers throughout New Zealand.